MP Maydell is Vice Chair of the European Parliament's Delegation for Relations with the United States. Welcome to DW. Should the EU be concerned about all this?
To be honest, I think the problem here is bigger than what Europe thinks at the moment, and it's larger than the transatlantic relationship itself. What we're seeing and witnessing over the past couple of weeks, but particularly with the latest revelation through the Signal chat, is that first, we see an administration that undermines tremendously global trade and trade routes. Secondly, we see an administration that has no issues with an organization that's a terrorist organization and that's supported by Iran. And thirdly, we hear a very negative message to all partners and to all allies of the US across the world. I wonder what the Middle East was thinking when they've read that conversation, and not only. So basically, the problem here is that the US image in the eyes of its most important allies across the world is of the lack of trust, but most importantly, of the inability to rely on a partner.
OK, there's some big charges there. You say that the United States has been undermining trade routes. Explain that.
Well, clearly, if you were revealing, according to the messages that were revealed, whether or not to attack now or in a month or whenever, judged primarily on what your internal situation in the country is, it's undermining global trade routes indeed. Once you also admit that you're the only one that could be capable of conducting such an attack.
OK. I'm guessing that if Pete Hegseth was here and even slightly bothered by that criticism, he might respond to you by saying, well, given that 40% of European trade passes through the routes that the Houthis are attacking, why isn't Europe doing more?
The rest is of the 100% is 60% global trade, and one could also argue that 40% benefits all companies operating on European soil.
How about answering the question I asked you? Why isn't Europe doing more?
So, I think for what Europe has to do is very carefully review those messages, because at the moment there is no other economic power, military power, and a continent that shares the same values with which US can ally.
Okay.
And I think what Europe has to do is actually read those messages very carefully and start thinking, what are the allies that actually want to keep global trade routes open? What are the allies that actually want to make sure we do not have to negotiate with terrorist organization and fight
those are conversations that have already begun.
And I think,
how should the EU respond now to these text messages?
I think the best way for Europe to respond, but as well as for the rest of the world, to assess the partnership and to assess the ally we have before us. And I think, I mean, as much as we very much want this partnership to continue, it's not the same partnership as it used to be. So we need to have a thorough assessment of everything that has happened in the past 3 months, including in the last couple of days. And we need to make sure that we find and reach out to those that, as I said, want to keep trade routes open, those that are willing to fight terrorist organizations. But in the same time, Europe has to also be better prepared when it comes to its military capabilities. And we have already started doing so.
We learned nothing new in these texts with regard to the White House's attitude to Europe. What these texts did was just confirm what we already knew.
I think what these text messages also very clearly show that the partnerships, according to US, refer to internal politics and whether you're also ready to pay for them. As I said, we need those partnerships, but not in this way and manner. And this is why we need to assess. But what I also think is that, something that has to be clear is that if the administration is fighting the Democrats, they need to understand that Europe is not the Democratic Party. As I said, we are those that are their most reliant and strong economic, military, and partner that is democratic. So I think they're confusing which fight they're fighting and with who.
OK. Thank you for joining us and outlining that so clearly. Eva Maydell, Vice Chair of the European Parliament's Delegation for Relations with the United States. Thank you.
Thank you.